What's going on, guys? The draft is tomorrow, and we're going to be doing some draft day prediction stuff, talking about who we think the Raptors is going to draft, a little bit of a description of these players. Obviously, I'm no expert on this, so I don't really want to talk too much in depth about these players. I've watched some of their film, I've studied it a little bit, and I've come to a consensus on what I think, how I think the draft is going to go after listening to a lot of different topics, listening to how these players play, watching video, like I said, and we're going to make a prediction on who the Raptors are going to draft, who we think is going to go in the 4 spot, and probably talk all the way up to 6 or 7 because there are some interesting guys that the Raptors have drafted that are projected to be in that 5 to 7 range in the draft. So let's get right into it, guys. Let's go. First, we're going to talk about the Detroit Pistons. And for the Pistons, they've got the number 1 overall pick. And I don't really know much about the rumblings in the front office, but I think the expectation is that they're going to take Cade Cunningham. And if they weren't, they would probably draft down if their guy was Mobley or Jalen Green. And for that reason, I think they sit at number 1 and they end up drafting Cade Cunningham. He's a 6'8" guard with the ability to score everywhere on the floor. He's just one of the most NBA-ready players who can become a transcendent superstar on both ends of the floor. He's really good defensively, and he's got a ton of different dribble moves and options from the three-point to the mid-range to attacking the basket in sort of this slow, stylistic way that is sort of reminiscent of a Luka Doncic, and he's got that type of potential as a scorer as well, just given the number of dribble moves he has and all the stuff that we've seen from him. So I think Detroit taking Cade is the easiest choice in this entire draft. I don't see any reason to go down unless you were to trade down to the 2nd spot and give Houston the opportunity to draft him. But if Houston were to stay at number 2, there are 2 guys left in this big 3, which the draft is essentially considered a big 2. It's considered a big 3, and then even to some extent a big 4 if we count Jalen Suggs. But I think Mobley's the second best player in this draft, and for that reason, I think you have to go with him. I know there is some rumblings with Jalen Green, especially as an athletic player, a 6'6" guard who lit up the G League, was an absolute unit athletically. But I think Evan Mobley has the ability to become a go-to scorer, and I've heard 2 different sides to this. A lot of people think that a traditional center can't coexist in the modern NBA, and I think the counter is that a lot of people think Evan Mobley, because he's 7 feet tall, is a traditional center, but I actually think he's very switchable and is a modern NBA big. He can't really shoot the 3 yet, but he's got the mid-range. He's definitely got a ton with the jump hook, especially with that right hand. I noticed a lot that that's sort of his go-to. He's got really good vision, too. He's actually a better passer than Jalen Green is at this point in his career, and he's a transcendent player defensively. Like, he's going to be very switchable. He's the kind of guy that can go out and guard on the perimeter, sort of like an Anthony Davis type of center, which if you look at the last 2 teams that won the title, you got Giannis, you've got Anthony Davis. The NBA is trending in this direction of switchable bigs who can defend on the perimeter. We saw Giannis go head-to-head against Chris Paul and was able to lock him down when he needed to. We saw Anthony Davis able to guard Jimmy Butler in the open floor when he needed to, and even in half court too. So I think there's this transcendent big man on the table here in Mobley, and I would be surprised if Houston didn't take him. And if they didn't want him and Cleveland really wanted him, you could potentially even trade down and let Cleveland take Mobley. But I think you just got to stay there. If I were Houston, I would take Mobley just because you have Christian Wood. Doesn't mean he's going to be a focal point down the line. He's already a good player, but I think Mobley could become a superstar level player, and I'm actually that high on him because of his two-way presence, his ability to score inside, and I think his mechanics are good enough that he can become a decent shooter, considering he's already got a bit of a mid-range game, and he's shown the ability for you to give him the ball and for him to go to work, similar to Anthony Davis. So I really like Mobley, and he's the type of player that I think 20 years old or so, is the type of player that's going to grow and become better. He's going to become bigger and stronger and will just become better with age in the NBA. So I think For Houston, you can take on a project player. You can still lose a ton of games, considering they only have, I think, their next 2 draft picks before they're all gone. I think for those first round picks specifically, I think they should go for that and just take Mobley at 2. The next is Cleveland, and I think Cleveland's got to go with Jalen Green. Get an athletic guard, a guy with the ability to run in transition. And for Cleveland, maybe you have a third guard, but I know that Sexton's on the table right now and they're looking to trade him. So maybe they could flip him for a veteran or potentially another young guy in the forward wing position, because I think there is a drop-off after Green and Suggs, who are 2 guards. So unless Cleveland isn't sold on either of these guys, they could trade down with OKC and get some future assets potentially, and then OKC could move up to try and maybe pair Jalen Green with SGA, which I think would be really interesting. But I do think Jalen Green is the 3rd best prospect, and as a result, he's going to get selected 3rd by either Cleveland, or I could see OKC moving up tomorrow and trying to draft him as well. The next team is our boys, the Toronto Raptors, and I think this is sort of where I'm going to stop and talk specifically about what the Toronto Raptors' options are. And this is sort of a trade down podcast. We're going to be talking about trading down. I don't think they're going to trade up. I just don't see why you'd want to do that unless you see a player above them that's got superstar potential. If you're able to trade up to number 1, that'd be interesting, but I feel like Detroit's in a better situation to take on a project like Cade Cunningham and a guy to give him the offense to. And for Toronto, they're already established. They're going to be losing Kyle Lowry potentially this offseason. Not potentially, I'm pretty certain he's gone. And as a result, there's going to be a hole in that point guard position. And who better than Jalen Suggs to be a poised point guard to come in and sort of take the reins. And this is why I think that with the 4th pick, Toronto is going to take Jalen Suggs. I would be shocked if they stayed at 4 and didn't take him and they drafted Barnes or Bouknight or Kuminga, who I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But for Suggs, he's a 6'4" guard who's super athletic. He's got great vision. He's one of the best passers in this draft. He's probably the most poised young player, won the title with Gonzaga. He's just one of those players that you can really trust with the ball in his hands already and would be a perfect mold to take over what Kyle Lowry produced. The only difference is that Suggs isn't a great three-point shooter. He shot under 34% in college last season, and because of that, I do have a bit of fear that his shot could be a concern, which is why he's getting comparisons to more of a Jason Kidd style of player. Great vision, great poise. He's a bigger guard at 6'4". He's athletic. He's very strong. And he's a modern NBA guard as well. He took over 80% of his shots from either layups or threes. So he's basically a prototypical NBA guard. And I think that if he can improve the 3 ball, he's going to be a great asset. He's not big in the mid-range, doesn't take many mid-range shots at all. And he's very strong going to the rim. He converts at about 64% when he goes in for a layup and can take contact, finish with both hands. He's got a lot of talent, a raw talent especially, in terms of like a shot-making ability. His passing is great, and I just really like him as a fit there for Toronto. There are a few other players that are in the conversation, but I do think that Toronto should consider maybe moving down to the 6th spot if they're not going to take Suggs, and I would like to see them take Bouknight, right? Another guard at 6'5" from UConn, a guy who's one of the best all-around scorers in this draft, and just a player that I think is really, really interesting. I know they also have had workouts with Scotty Barnes and Kuminga, both of whom I personally don't like because they're non-shooters and have shown poor mechanics up to this point. They are bigger guys. They're more like a small forward, power forward sort of role. And potentially if they were to draft one of those guys, I think that's an indication that Siakam's getting traded. I do think if you get a guy like Suggs, you could plug him directly into this lineup and roll with it. I think if you're taking Scotty Barnes or Kuminga being probably more of a project type player, I do think that means that you move on from Siakam and probably trade him for some other young player to fit around him, but perhaps they're still weighing their options. I think that for Toronto, a big move is in play in the next few days, especially tomorrow night, because I do think that in the next, from now until August 3rd, which is when free agency starts, a lot of stuff is going to be shifted for Toronto. We could see them trade Ben Simmons. trade for Ben Simmons, whether it's like a Siakam based package or a Lowry based package, and then that could dictate who they pick in the draft as well, or vice versa. So there's a lot of options for them because of their flexibility in terms of being willing to trade Siakam, being interested in trading for Ben Simmons. If you're to trade for Ben Simmons, I don't think you need Scotty Barnes, and I don't think you need Kuminga because these are also non-shooters. But maybe you do end up going with Jalen Suggs or Book Knight if you're to think Ben Simmons is the guy to draft. And then I think Book Knight's interesting. I think Suggs is interesting. Those are the two guys I lean towards because I think the Raptors do need more half-court scoring, and those are the kinds of players that they desperately need on their roster. So that's my two different predictions for the Toronto Raptors. I think they stay at 4 and take Suggs, but I do think there's a world where they trade with OKC, they move down to the 6th spot, and then they take Book Knight. And that's probably my second favorite option. Or another thing I could see happening, and I know I'm kind of hedging, those are the two top things I think I see happening. But then there's another where they end up pulling the trigger for a guy like Ben Simmons, and maybe they trade Suggs and they get Ben Simmons back. I think something like that could potentially happen as well, where Toronto uses this pick as leverage in the Ben Simmons trade debacle that's going on. But let me know what you guys think is going to happen. Put your predictions in the comments of who you think the Raptors are going to draft. And I look forward to seeing what you guys said. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe. I'm going to have a reaction video tomorrow night after the draft talking about whoever they pick. My bet, like I said, Suggs, Book Knight's number 2. Let's see what happens. Peace out, everyone.